Hello friends, it's Shari, and today I'm making a fun Halloween Flippy Flappy card. When you pull that tab, a cauldron full of fun bubbles are going to pop up from the back. So I'm using the Purrfectly Wicked stamp set for my cats and a lot of my elements, and then I'm going to use a couple things from the add-on, which is that little poof cloud, and then that little tiny worm, which I just think is adorable. So I'm coloring my cats. I'm using two warm gray colors. I've stamped all these images out on some white cardstock with jet black ink so that it's Copic friendly. And I've just put down the darker gray where some shadows are along the sides of its face and its belly and legs. And then I come in with the lighter gray and sort of blend that out. Then I'll go back in with that dark gray again and kind of pull those shadows, make them just a little bit darker. And then I'll blend that out again. And I will color the other cat in the exact same way as I'm coloring this one, with the exact same colors so that they match. And then I'll just add a little dot of pink for their noses. Now I'm going to color all these fun little elements that come in the stamp set. I love these little potion bottles. I'm coloring all these things in some bright colors, but I'm staying away from green because that's going to be my background. So for two of these bottles, I'm using yellows and oranges. I've colored that label with two colors to make it look rounded, and then I'm going to add some to this one to look like it has some liquid in there. I'm going to do the same kind of technique for the purple one. And then I'm making the bottle darker on this one. And then for this last one, I'm going to use some teal colors. So I'm coloring the bottle part lighter and then the contents inside a bit darker. And then I'll just add some gray and some brown for the caps and the corks. This little crystal here I've colored in some bright pink, and then I'm going to also color this book with that same teal. So we have a little bit more teal in there, and then a very, very pale brown for the pages inside. So it's almost just like a creamy, old paper color. So now to color my cauldrons, I'm using some dark grays. I like using dark grays instead of black, because if it was just straight black, you couldn't get this color variation to kind of get the shape of the cauldron. So you can see I put darker on the edges and pulled it towards the inside to give it the look of a round shaped item. I'm going to do the same thing up on the lip up here, up on the rim. Darker on the outside, lighter towards the middle. Of course, I'll color that second cauldron in the same way. And then for this little line, which is the back lip of the cauldron, I'm going to use the same colors and just color that gray down a bit so that I know it will be hidden behind the cauldron when it is die cut. I'm using the same purples as the bottle for the little worm. And then for the poof, I'm just going to add some yellow to those little star sparkle shapes and some very pale gray to the little cloud. And then finally, I have my cauldron full of those kind of toxic bug bubbles, I guess, for the potion. And I'm using some yellow greens for that. So I'm putting down that lightest yellow green, that YG21 first, using the YG23 to put some shadows. And then I'm going to go in with that Y15, which is a yellow, and just put some of that yellow in there. It makes it really look toxic and different than it just being green, which I just think is a really fun effect. And then before I die cut things out, I'm going to go ahead and stamp bat wings on one of the bottles and frog's breath on the other. So those little stamps fit in that label perfectly. I will use the coordinating dies for these sets to cut all these images out and set them aside while I work on my background. So I have used a stitch rectangle die to cut a piece of Bristol cardstock that I can ink blend my background on. So this is the largest of these small stitched rectangle stackables. This is the size that you need for a Flippy Flappy card. And I am putting a layer of Twisted Citron all over this piece. So that's why I made it super fast. I'm not doing anything groundbreaking here, just covering it in that twisted citron. And then I'm going to go in with the Lucky Clover and my blending brush and pull that green in from the edges to kind of give it this spooky glow, darken up those edges so you see it lighter in the middle. And I just think this is a really fun look. Now to add some texture, I'm using the same Twisted Citron, but this is the Distress Oxide. I use the regular Distress on the paper itself. This I'm going to use for some green splatters. So I've added some water, picking that up with my paintbrush, and I will just splatter some green splatters on the background. Those green splatters are pretty subtle, and my favorite thing to do is to add black paint splatters, especially on Halloween cards. So I've got my watercolor out and I'm just using regular black watercolor. You could also use black distress ink, and I'm putting those splatters kind of around. Those are big, and then I'm going to go in with my acrylic block, put a little paint on my brush and flick it off the side, and I'm going to get these really tiny black splatters. So I just think that the black on this background really gives it a nice spooky Halloween-y look. It's really hard to see those splatters off the block right now. They are super tiny. And then finally, you know I love my gold metallic splatters, so I'm going to add some of that too because these kitties are making some potion. They're into some magic, so we need some gold to catch the light and catch your eye. So I'm doing the same thing here with the small splatters so that they're very subtle on the background. And you can see how it catches the light and you get that sort of shimmery, sparkly look. Now for my sentiment, I'm using the Giant Happy Halloween die. I just think this is a really fun sentiment die. I've cut it from some purple sparkle cardstock. This is from the Autumn pack. And I've also cut it from some black cardstock so that I can put these together and offset them and get that little black drop shadow behind there. So I've just put some liquid glue all over the back of that glitter piece, and I'm just laying it on there offset a little bit so you can see how you get that black shadow behind the sparkle. Now it's time to build our Flippy Flappy. I've cut another stitch rectangle, same size as the one I did with the green. This is just cut from some regular white cardstock because this is going to get covered up. And I'm just looking at the placement of where my cauldron's going to be and my sentiment so that I know where to cut the little mechanism that's going to give us the flipping action, which is this die right here that cuts kind of a little accordion piece that we're going to fold and has that little arrow. So for my cauldron, I wanted it pretty much centered. It's going to kind of flip up on top of that O in the word Halloween. So I've lined this up with the bottom edge of my panel that I have here. I've got that arrow pointing at the center. I use my grid mat to find that center, and I'm just going to run that through the die cut machine. So I've also cut the tab that you're going to pull, which is this die right here, from some purple cardstock because you're going to see this when it pulls out. And I'm just going to use that here in a second, set that aside. Before I attach that, I want to fold on these score lines that the die creates, and I want to fold them in both directions. So I'm going to fold them all forward, flip it over, and fold them all in the other direction. This will make the paper move really well, and the more it moves, the better it gets. So I'm going to flip this. This is face down, which I know is hard to tell because it's white. And I'm also going to flip the purple piece. So they're both face down. I'm going to thread this first little piece of this accordion here through the slot that the die cuts on the tab that you pull. Just the first one right to that first fold. So you can see how when it's folded, it kind of butts up to there. I'm going to put a piece of double-sided tape right on that tab on the bottom side of it, I guess. And then I'm folding that over to where it touches the purple tab. So when you flip it back over, this is what it needs to do. So I'm just making sure it moves pretty well. I'm putting it down on my desk to make sure it pulls like it should. Okay, now I'm going to flip it back over to the back side and we're going to add our foam tape. Now you need to be sure that you add the foam tape only on the edges and you want it to be double thickness. So I've just got a piece here. I'm going to fold it over on itself to double up the thickness. And then I can cut my pieces to use from this. So this is double thickness tape. And you only want to put it on the sides. I'm going to show you exactly where you want it. And the reason why you only want it on the sides is because this panel needs to buckle a little bit in order for this mechanism to work well. So if you put that foam tape really close to the piece that's moving, it's going to be too tight and it's going to get bound up in there and your Flippy Flappy is not going to flip out. It's going to get stuck. So you want to make sure that that foam is right on the edges. So for my card base, I'm using some pattern paper from the Into the Woods pattern paper pack. I'm using that orange side. That's a very good Halloween orange. I like those little subtle stripes that we have there. So I've just cut that to fit a standard size card base, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And then I want to cut a little notch at the bottom. So this die comes in the set as well. And this lets you cut a notch at the bottom so that you can grab that tab that you need to pull a little more easy. So that bar that's on the die, you're just going to line that up with the bottom of the card, not on the card, off the card. So it's on the bottom. And this is going to cut the smallest little notch for that tab to get grabbed. So I've already cut my notch and now I'm going to attach this mechanism to the card base. You can see that little notch there that it cut. I've pulled off that liner paper from my foam and I'm just going to center this up on my card base with that orange. Now all of this is going to get covered up with that green panel that we're going to decorate and make it all look pretty. So this is the workings behind the panel, making sure that it pulls out like it should. And then there's also a little die in this set that cuts a little piece that you can decorate the bottom, and it also cuts the little arrow telling the recipient to pull. So kind of indicate there's something going on. So I just cut that from black. And then there is a die in the set that you use to cut a piece of acetate for an image like we're doing today, and also a die that cuts a little strip to hide the acetate. So I've put some double-sided tape right on the bottom of that acetate piece that I cut with the die. And I've got my tab pulled out. So this is in the out position. And I'm just going to line that up onto that white piece. Right centered, that's where my image is going to go. And then of course I cut the piece that you use to cover up the white out of that purple so it all looks seamless when it pulls out and it hides that mechanism and that piece of acetate. So I'm putting some double-sided adhesive on the back of that as well, and then that just lines up right on top of the white piece, and then it all looks like one tab. And it hides right inside and will flip out just like that. So now that I have the pieces ready to put my Flippy Flappy together, I can add that panel that we inked earlier to the front. So I've just put adhesive all over, making sure to avoid the center where the part that moves is. You want to make sure you don't put any adhesive on that. And I'm just checking that it pulls out well. And honestly, it works better when this second piece of cardstock gets layered on top. So I'm putting my bubbles in my cauldron. This is the cauldron that's going to go on that piece of acetate. I'm just kind of checking the placement, and then that will tell me how much I can trim off that piece of acetate because it's a little longer than I need it to be for the image that I'm using. So you just trim off the excess so that it's as long as you need. I'm going to go ahead and put my die cut Happy Halloween on there so that I can get the placement of my cauldron right on my piece of acetate. And then I'm also going to go ahead and put the cauldron that goes behind it. So this is an empty cauldron. You'll see this when the card is not flipped out. So I'm just placing that sort of tucked behind the O. Like I said before, I want this cauldron to kind of line up with the O, like the O is going to fill up with those spooky bubbles in the cauldron. So I'm lining all these pieces up first before I put the image onto the piece of acetate so that I can line them up to where it covers up the cauldron. So the idea behind this card was that when it flips out, the cauldron goes from empty to poof, full of some spooky potion. I'm using glue dots to adhere that cauldron to the piece of acetate. So I've just put 2 glue dots on there, and then you can see I'm lining that right on top of the cauldron that I glued to the background. And then I also wanted to add something to this tab. It was kind of plain, so I thought it would be fun to add the sentiment that is from the Purrfectly Wicked add-on set that says, "No tricks, just treats." So you get a little surprise on the tab too when you pull it out. And there's also a little stamp in here that says yay. And then now to add all those other pieces that I colored earlier, my bottles of potion and my cats. So I'm just placing them where I want them to be. I'm adding them directly to that background panel, or in the case of that purple one there, I put a thin foam square on it. So you get a little bit of height with that thin foam square, just so these aren't so flat on the card. I like the idea of this single book kind of leaned over, hiding that crystal behind it. So it kind of fell over, leaning onto that H of the happy. It's kind of like the Happy Halloween are shelves in the kitchen of these spooky little witch kitties. And then I'm adding each of the kitties with some foam squares as well, so they're popped up a little bit. And then finally, I've got that poof that I colored earlier. So that's, you know, the magic when the cauldron full of bubbles pops out. And then I'm also adding that cute little worm, which might be my favorite. I'm not sure why. It's just so cute. But I'm adding him to the cauldron as well. So that it's very obvious that you go from this sort of empty cauldron with nothing going on to a cauldron full of bubbles with some extra stuff happening. And then here is that final card. You pull that out and you get that cauldron full of spooky bubbles. So here is a closer look at that card with all those bright, fun Halloween colors happening. And then when you pull that tab, you get that cauldron full of bubbles. I also added stickles to the bubbles, as you can see. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.